Hi, I'm David with EV World News. We talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. And I am here today with our founder and chief editor, Bill Moore. How's it going today, Bill?
Been good, thank you. I already been down to the county building and got my wife's car new registration tags on it. So it's already been a productive morning.
Well, good, good. Let's talk about the Hurricane Helene. And this has been kind of interesting. They had these
Yeah,
big storm surges down in Tampa, and then it went across Florida, then went up the coast, right?
yep.
And anyways, what was kind of bizarre, this is up in North Carolina. Hurricane Helene shuts down the Spruce Pine, North Carolina mine that is pivotal to the world's semiconductor supply.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking about this before we came on live, is that the quartz that is mined in this facility in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, is the purest quartz in the world, and it's what everybody wants to make their silicon wafers. And
Right.
what's interesting is from an aerial view of the mine, it looks like a big splot of like Elmer's glue got spilled on the ground here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but it's interesting how the whole mine is white. But anyways, so what's happened is the flooding has made it so that roads and some train infrastructure there can't get around. Employees and their families, they're facing displacement, significant disruptions. There's damage, there's power outages, communication disruptions, and lots of critical infrastructure is damaged there as well. The storm had dumped 2 feet of rain on the town.
Yeah. Have
That's
you
a lot
seen
of
it? Have you
water.
seen any of the? Yeah. Have you seen any of the video of Asheville, North Carolina? Holy,
Uh, No, but I
unbelievable!
saw
It's
last year
unbelievable.
Fort Lauderdale had like 25 inches of rain in one day, and like over half of that was in something like an hour.
Yeah.
And they had all this standing water everywhere,
Well,
and
the,
it
the,
was
diff-
kind of nuts.
the difference is this is Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah.
This is Asheville and the Carolinas because I lived there for 5 years. I
Oh,
know
okay.
that area. Not Asheville, but just north of Asheville, just across the border into the very southern tip. If you look at West Virginia, put the very southern tip of West Virginia, and that's where I used to live. So it's the same terrain. So you take all of that area, and all that gets funneled into these slots, and that can just do absolute wreak havoc. And so many of those areas, because of that terrain, the roads are narrow and twisting. Same thing, that oftentimes the train tracks are built down closer to the riverbed, closer to the bottom of the valley, and you get that kind of rain, which is just unprecedented. It's just unprecedented. I've been I when I lived in West Virginia, one year we had a pretty heavy downpours, and because that area around there was heavily mined, and there were what we call slag piles, all big giant, you know, mountains themselves virtually of coal waste. That river, I can't quite remember the name of the river now, but that river literally was running black. It was that. So you just take all that and channel that into a little narrow area, and the force of gravity, and that's going to do a lot of damage to that infrastructure. So I'm not surprised that this happened. Of course, I'm surprised the amount of rain they got, but not surprised that it'll do this kind of damage. And of course, when you're talking about some of the rarest form of silica in the world, that becomes a problem. So.
Yeah, I was never aware of this was a thing here. So it's amazing that if you want to get high purity quartz, the kind you need to make the crucibles, without which you can't make silicon wafers, it has to come from spruce pine. Apparently,
Yeah.
they've not located any other source in the world for quartz that is anywhere near the purity of
That
this.
that has that purity, yeah. Although
Yeah.
we were talking about before, I'm curious as to what that, is it 100% pure quartz, or is it some fraction of it? But it just happens to be the highest fraction of it in the world. And then again, we know there are parts of the world, Afghanistan, for example, that is rich in minerals, but they're so screwed up. I won't say the other word. I would say they're so screwed up over there politically and economically that there might be resources there that could be tapped and we can't get to them. So that, I mean, for the North Carolina community, we've got those jobs and that very precious resource. But boy, was anybody expecting to have that cut off?
No, not really. It's weird sometimes when you see stuff like it's like we have this strike going on the East Coast. The East Coast ports have this big strike going on now, and it's hard to fathom how many billions of dollars of trade that's going to affect.
And a long time, I saw a guy where he says if you're, what was it? If they're down a week, I forget the numbers, but it has a surprising ripple effect, right? That kind of increases. The longer it goes, the more damaging what's the word I want? Exponentially, right? So if it only goes a day, you throw things off a week. If it goes 2 days, you throw things off 3 weeks. That kind of thing. So
well, look at how much COVID raised the price of cars, new and used, and it was nuts. What a difference that made in car prices for a while, and now I'd like to say car prices adjusted back down, everything but full-size trucks.
Yeah, that's their money maker, baby. That's the money maker.
So speaking of a big truck maker, let's talk about Ford for just a minute. So Jim Farley from Ford just announced they're going to start giving a free charger and basic installation.
And the install,
yeah. So that's a pretty cool thing because normally you can get a level 2 charger for $400 or $500, but the installation will run you anywhere from about $700 to $1,500 or more. It just keeps going up from there. But he was talking on LinkedIn about this, and he was saying, like, if somebody had a separate garage or they had to have trenching done, stuff like that, they're going to have to pay for that themselves. But it just basically, if they have a garage and it's getting plugged in there, that Ford's going to cover that. And so that's pretty decent. I mean, that's about a $1,200 to $1,500 perk.
That's a big deal
on the car purchase.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty decent. So I just thought that was worth sharing. And you just never know where that's going to head out. I had something else I want to talk about that was kind of that I thought was a little unusual. So, we've talked about efficiency sometimes in the EVs. We've got everything from the Hummer EV, which gets something like 1.5 miles per kilowatt hour, to the super efficient Lucid, which gets 5 miles per kilowatt hour. Now, you can make a vehicle very light. If you make one very light, you could get 10 plus miles per kilowatt hour. But a lot of this is really varied. We're assuming we have kind of a normal large battery size on a sedan, something like that. Well, the one company that's really come out with something interesting is Xiaomi. Xiaomi just came out with a 98% efficient engine. And so they're looking to outperform even Lucid on their thing. And then, what's weird about this is Xiaomi's not a traditional car maker. They're a cell phone maker, right?
Yeah.
And they're a cell phone maker that decided they were going to make electric cars. They've made one car so far, which has had some quality issues. Okay, it's had some real quality issues, but it looks cool, and it looks like a high-end Porsche for about $30,000.
Yeah, that's the Porsche take on ripoff, right?
Yeah, and it looks like a car that's 3 times its price, and it's sold like crazy. I mean, they've sold like 100,000 of them already over in China.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's nuts. So, anyways, now they're coming out with a super efficient electric engine, and as Musk has said, the Chinese auto manufacturing is really the big leagues of auto manufacturing now. And they keep coming out, and a company that's well funded like Xiaomi is not going to have an issue bringing this to market. So this is something that's really going to put pressure on the other manufacturers to start making super efficient engines. And nobody's ever questioned how high quality the electric motors are on, say, like Teslas, but Lucid's pushed beyond Tesla.
Yeah.
It's just Lucid, they don't really make a whole lot of stuff people are buying. I mean, they don't sell a crazy amount of cars. They're about to start manufacturing in Saudi Arabia, and they're looking at bringing a cheaper SUV to market. I think they're going to get some traction. They're not underfunded, by any stretch, but I'm just saying they're not. They don't seem to be the big threat Xiaomi is. You know what I mean? In the electric vehicle space.
Well,
So
again, but Lucid has the protection of a U.S. tariff barrier.
right.
The Xiaomi has to, if they can overcome it. I saw an interesting article. They were talking about the new lines of Buicks.
Yeah.
And almost all of those Buicks are designed and built in China. Right now, they're not electric; they're gas powered, and you can get one of those here, right? So what's keeping them from? Well, we're going to introduce an electric version of the Buick, whatever name they've given it. I don't know. This is one of the more interesting conundrums being faced by the auto industry. Since of course, there was the Volkswagen, right? In the 50s. Then there were the Japanese in the 70s, and then the Koreans in the 90s. Hyundai they passed their 100 millionth car that they've manufactured, something like that. I mean, I don't
know.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see who's the first to break that, figure out how to break that barrier. And then if they do, what's the tariffs going to be, and how does the U.S. government and consumers, I assume consumers will probably adapt because, they should be able to get it reasonably cheap. What was the old expression? May you be born in live in interesting
times. May you live in
interesting
times. The curse, Chinese curse.
Are we?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Bill. Hyundai Motors hits major milestone with 100 million vehicles produced globally. 57. It only took 57 years. That's just nuts to imagine that they did, and it was an EV. The 100 millionth vehicle was an Ioniq 5.
Sure it was. Hey, speaking of which, which one is it? The Ioniq 5 or the 6? That's the real sort of streamlined.
I think it's the 6.
The 6. I think it's the 6. And somebody's got one here in town because
I've seen them. I've seen 5s and 6s around town. I saw a Kia EV9 in front of me earlier today. So,
in fact, I've probably seen that same car. I bet I've seen one going down the road here.
Yeah, this was a blue one. Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Yep, it was probably the same one.
Hey, folks, we live in a small community, right?
Yeah,
population.
Omaha's not huge, no.
Well, where we live, in Papillion, it's like 20,000 people. So when somebody gets a new car, we notice.
I think it was Fortune magazine named Omaha earlier this year the #1 city to move to in the whole United States.
Yeah.
And Papillion, where we live, is considered to be in the top 5 smaller towns in America consistently. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's a lot not going on here. And I think the reason we hit those numbers because the bad stuff you see everywhere else is just not going on here, and that's a lot of it.
We have our share of problems, but they're not to the scale that you might expect. Maybe you live in Oakland, California, or somewhere like that.
I tell you, the one thing we certainly have is the least potholes in the whole country. So if you don't like potholes, Papillion is the place to live because they've figured out how not to let potholes last.
Right.
Now, there's some parking lots that have them, but not on the road. Holy crap. There'll be the slightest nick out of the concrete and they'll come tear out a 10 by 10 section or bigger of the road and haul it off and they'll come re-pour it. And I'm just like,
well, yeah,
it seems excessive.
Is that the city? Is that the county? Or is that the state? Because obviously, whoever has jurisdiction over that particular stretch of road is the one responsible for
I don't know, but those
maintaining
guys
it.
are like really passionate about getting rid of our potholes. And it's really funny because you go up north into Douglas County, which is Omaha,
Yeah.
they're everywhere.
There
You
are
know,
still streets in Omaha that are unpaved, and
oh, there's no question.
these are these are
Decent
nice.
neighborhoods too.
Oh yeah, these are nice, expensive homes. That were probably built in the 40s and 50s. The sort of brick Victorian kind of style thing. And they never got around to paving the street. What
Now
the?
over between like Blondo um and Dodge, west of 90th, between 90th and 100th,
Yeah,
there's a whole neighborhood there that's about every third street isn't paved.
yeah.
And it's just like,
That's
it doesn't make any sense.
that's got to be some kind of jurisdictional issue going on there.
Yeah, some of they were probably annexed. They weren't part of the city when that was done. It was
Yeah,
country when it was done.
yeah,
Then they were annexed and it didn't make it.
yeah.
Anyways, we're getting way off topic.
Way off topic. Get back to topic.
Yes. All
Sorry,
right.
folks.
Let's talk about the $25,000 Mazda. So this is actually a decent looking car.
Mhm.
Sadly, we see some of these prices. When I saw that $25,000 for the Mazda,
Your eyes lit up.
well,
Mine
pretty
did
competitive. It's
too.
nice
That's a good
looking.
looking. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice looking color, nice looking car. You don't hear much about Mazda, really. Mazda's Bill and I were talking about this before we came on the show. Their last foray into the EV space wasn't very good.
Nah, it was a
And
disaster.
but a 25 grand, it's a whole different story. Now, this is co-developed between Mazda and Chinese state-owned, meaning it's part of the CCP,
Mhm.
Chang'an Auto. It was one of two electric offerings that debuted back in April. The other was a CX-5 crossover,
Yeah.
but the EZ6 seemed closer to production with promised on-sale date later this year. Now, the problem with this, and this looks really nice. You look at the
Yep.
styling on the seats, you look at the dash, you've got the wireless charging here.
There's a huge caveat, however, or as one writer of reviews said, there's a big asterisk with this car. That $25,000 price tag, no, he just converted the RMB to the dollar equivalent. This car is not, and currently not available in the United States. So,
And if it is, it'll be $60,000.
And probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that's kind of sad about some of this is that we see these prices on some of these cars overseas, and this car will appear in Europe. It's going to appear everywhere, probably but the United States or Canada. And because the United States and Canada have 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. And even though Mazda manufactures some stuff here in the United States, I don't think that's going to, unless they make these here in the US, it's not going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
But it is a nice looking car.
Yes, absolutely.
But, it's unlikely it'll ever come to the US. So it is kind of wild though to see some of it. It's like we're waiting for that VF3 from VinFast to come to the US, and they're selling it for $10,000 over in Vietnam. We expect it to be $20,000 here in the US, even though it's not the same tariffs. There's some, changes in equipment it must have in the United States and things like that. And it'll be interesting to see. I want to cover the what plug-in hybrids are eligible for the U.S. EV tax credit.
I posted it, but I didn't bother to look at the article too closely.
I didn't really realize. So on the used tax credit, if you buy a used EV or a used plug-in hybrid, that $4,000, the plug-in hybrids are all eligible for it. But there really aren't a lot of used plug-in hybrids, and there aren't really a whole lot of new plug-in hybrids either. So I'm going to share this. This comes to us from Car and Driver, and I didn't even know this was a thing, but the 2024 Chrysler Pacifica plug-in
Mm-hmm.
hybrid minivan is eligible for a full $7,500 rebate. It's the only vehicle made that's a plug-in hybrid that is eligible for the 7,500 bucks. Okay, and it's actually pretty decent little minivan. It's got a 260 horsepower engine, which minivans are kind of notorious for being kind of on the slow side, and that's pretty powerful engine, a 3.6 liter V6 and two electric motors. It only has a 33-mile range
Right.
as an EV, but you'll always drive those first 33 miles as an electric vehicle. And it's full of practicality, seating for 7, cup holders, slide out bins. The battery gets in the way of the folding rear seats. Chrysler added extra padding as a consolation. Starts out at $52,750, and it's the only plug-in hybrid that can get the full $7,500 tax credit. I didn't even know there
Okay.
was such an animal. Anyways,
Well, yeah,
I mean, I was familiar with the Pacifica.
they've had the plug-in Civica for quite a while now. I'd say probably 4 or 5 years now. They have had some recall issues with previous models. So if you're looking at the used, you want to make sure that any of the recalls have been dealt with the car. This is one of the we were talking about earlier, maybe off record here, about the Jeep having all of their 195,000 of their plug-in hybrids, asking their owners to not charge them and to plug them out or to park them outside. Don't park them in the building. So
because of fire issues.
because of a potential fire issue, not because of the battery, interestingly, but because I think it had something to do with the power steering mechanism or something or
Mm-hmm.
another. So,
yeah, but we've talked about this before. So plug-in hybrids, or not plug-in hybrids in general, catch fire at twice the rate of gas vehicles and at 120 times the rate of electric vehicles, of full electrics. So there's something about plug-in hybrids, and maybe it's just there's too many systems. There's that many extra systems that can catch on fire.
yeah.
I don't know. They can have a short. But I know in the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid space, it is hard to find one that fits into that $25,000 tax credit vehicle. The guy in Salt Lake City, I've seen him have a few from time to time, but it's pretty rare to find one that ever drops into that 25,000 range. They seem to hold value pretty well. This one does.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. But there was a couple of there aren't many vehicles that actually qualify. So the rest of these only qualify for half the tax credit, which is $3,750. And
Probably
it's the
has to
Ford.
do with the size, I would guess. They'd have a smaller battery than what
That could be it. So the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid, and it's only got 11.7 kilowatt hour battery pack. Yeah, maybe it has to be over 16 or 17 to qualify for the whole thing. Here's you're just talking about Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. Let's see, it only has a 23-mile range on the battery.
That's one of the ones that's under the recall.
But it's interesting with that one, it ranges in price from 62,000 to 81,000, and you're getting a 3750 tax credit. And a Jeep Wrangler 4xe gets 3750, and it ranges from 52,000 to 72,000 dollars. Man, Jeep wants some real money for their vehicles, don't they? Let's see. Lincoln Corsair Grand Touring. Lincoln's smallest SUV. It's based on the Ford Escape, so it's very similar. Runs anywhere. Starts at 55,000. But I thought that was kind of worth covering. That was all of them. That was all the vehicles.
That was it.
That was it. There's no other. Now there's plug-in hybrids from whatchamacallit, from Hyundai, and Toyota has some, but apparently they're not eligible.
Yeah.
So independent mechanics say they cannot repair hybrids because they cannot get parts. Owning one after warranty, you'll be forced to pay dealer prices for service. Oh, well, that's a problem. And I think that parts issue has been an issue in a lot of spaces, and this whole thing with the port shutting down sort of not going to make that
Yeah.
any simpler for a while here. Let's see. What were we going to next? All right. So let's talk about JD Power and public EV charging. So perception, this is one thing we talked about a lot in the past, is if you're not on the Tesla supercharger network, your satisfaction with public charging is probably not that good. But so JD Power says that public EV charging is improving. Now, I'm kind of wondering, there's two possibilities here. So 6 or 7 of the manufacturers have now signed agreements with Tesla, like including GM and Ford and Hyundai, to use the Tesla supercharging network. So I'm wondering, and Rivian and Lucid, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at, are they happier now because they're able to use the Tesla network? Or did the other network improve? Okay, that the story we've got didn't really get into that part, and so I'm just kind of wondering. It's like, are you happier because you have access to the better network? Yeah, prospective car buyers point to the limited landscape of public electric vehicle chargers as a barrier to adoption. And I don't know. I mean, you'd think you would know better, or there's almost 200,000 public chargers in the United States. It's like, it doesn't seem like a small number, and so you just kind of, wonder, that's 4,000 per state. Obviously we don't have that in Nebraska. Go ahead.
I posted an article under my editor's choice yesterday that the gentleman says, look, I just stopped worrying about charging my car when he takes these long distance trips from Toronto to Nova Scotia, and from Toronto to New York and places like that. And he says, I always worried about, and he has Polestar, I think, maybe. And he says, always worried about it. He says, you know what? He says, I started letting the software on the car tell me when and where to charge, and I've had no problems, and suddenly all my range anxiety issues went away. He said, because he was using all kinds of apps on his phone and just had didn't have a pleasant experience. He said, as soon as I let the software on the car start doing the planning for me and where to go, he says, it was a much better experience. So maybe that's what, we need to be people to, be thinking more about. Stop worrying, and let the car do the worrying for you. At least that's his conclusion in the article. I thought it was worthy enough to make it one of my editor's choices.
Well, JD Power said the fact that non-Tesla owners can now charge at Tesla superchargers as of 24 contributes to the improvement in DC charger satisfaction. Overall, both Tesla and non-Tesla owners find charging their vehicles at Tesla supercharger facilities is most satisfying.
Yeah. So it's shaded the results quite a bit now.
Right. Yeah. So I kind of was wondering, it's like, well, because it would be a real reason not to buy a non-Tesla. It would be for that reason. I mean, you look at the guy who, the Canadian, had that horrible story where he bought a Ford F-150 Lightning and drove into Minnesota and couldn't charge it because the charging stations weren't working, and he had to have it towed somewhere. And it was just a nightmare, for Ford having that go out there, and Ford solved that. They got on the Tesla network. And for all the complaints about Tesla, they've certainly opened up a lot of their tech to their competitors, but that allows them to make money on charging, right? And the more people are using their supercharger network, the more they can justify adding to it and making it a bigger network too.
Yeah.
So the network adoption goes a long ways. I wanted to talk about a $3.5 billion EV battery factory is coming to one U.S. state, and over 1,000 new jobs are on the way. And this is Indiana. Now, I don't know exactly what all the story is here because I didn't really review the article, but it's a General Motors Samsung plant being built in New Carlisle, Indiana, and it's set to begin production in 25. So it's not that far. Oh, well, first it was set to begin production in 25, then it changed to 26, and now it's changed to 27.
Yeah.
So, it takes a while to build a multi-billion-dollar plant. I'm assuming one of the reasons that they picked this is they probably got significant money from the state of Indiana, but they're expecting it to create 1,600 jobs, and construction was supposed to employ 1,000 people on top of that. Mary Barra says GM will be able to manufacture more than 1 million EVs thanks to its Samsung partnership, part of a plan to create a hub of EV tech and technology. I know that been offering this, like, if there was like 3 billion put up, they would put up 600 million kind of thing. Like they'd hit 20% of what the investment was if you went into specific counties, and so you're creating jobs in some of these counties that that need it, kind of thing. I suspect that's probably what's happening here too. They never really get too deep into that.
I learned something interesting a weekend or so ago. We had a good friend of ours. He is a retired Air Force officer who has basically got into the business of safety management. So when you build a large thing like a factory, his responsibility is to oversee and make sure that all of the workers and things are complying with safety guidelines and things. That's his specialty. And so he told me that looks like he's got his next project is going to be one of these battery plants.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which I forget the name. I don't think it's the Samsung one, the GM one. I think it's another one. But that will probably be his next project. Will be helping oversee the safe construction of one of these battery plants.
Nice. All right. So, in other news, the USA is now up to 8% battery electric vehicle share of the auto market. So, and let's see, this was for the second quarter of 2024, and sales of 100% electric vehicles increased by 16% year over year.
Yeah, this particular article has some really good graphics.
But it's no longer like 200% year over year.
Right.
It is certainly, the growth has slowed down, but it's still 16% higher than the previous year, where it was went from 7% of sales to 8.1%.
Yeah, but wasn't the what was it, 2 years or something like that? It was like 160%.
Yeah, it's big. Oh, it was 86% from quarter 2 of 22 to quarter 2 of 24. 86% is a pretty big jump, nearly doubling sales in 2 years. Yeah, as EV sales slow down,
Right, exactly.
I always see these as like EV growth isn't, well, I can understand that. If you thought it was going to keep doubling every year, then yes, the growth is not what you had expected, perhaps, but it's still consistent. And what's interesting too, the U.S. market has some of the least incentives of all the countries in the world that incentivize EV ownership.
Which is one of the articles I posted also this morning. That's the point they make, is that we are, compared to Europe and compared to China, we are one of the fewest, have some of the fewest incentives for encouraging the adoption of electric. I mean, there's a reason. Where are we? About 96% of all the new cars sold in Norway are now electric. 60% of the cars in China, new cars being sold in China, are now electric. And here, whoopee, we're 8%.
So, battery electric cars went up 16% in the past year. Gas car sales went down a whopping 1%.
Ooh.
Yes, in that same
Yeah,
time period. So
well,
it's interesting. It shows you that there's simply more people buying cars is part of it.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's growth. Gas car sales are down 14% compared to 5 years previously. So, because the high was in 2019, and um, we still have millions of new gas-powered cars getting onto U.S. roads each quarter.
Yeah.
Progress is slow. We're getting close to getting 10%. I don't know. The thing is, in 10 years, can we be like Norway? Where almost all the new cars are,
So much.
electric? Maybe.
The car, guys like Jim Farley and others are lamenting the fact, and I posted some articles on this, I think it was last week, where they're lamenting the fact that, electric cars, the whole subject has become politicized. And of course, you've got this current tug of war between one side and the other side. We are here locally inundated with, oh God, hundreds, I would suspect, of ads for various political candidates and things, slinging mud at each other like crazy. And
Right.
unfortunately, in the middle of that are our electric cars, which is just shouldn't be. There's no reason it should be there, but it has become that, and that is a drag, and it's recognized by the car makers now. That's a drag on sales of that particular product.
Well, there's so much, you know, cherry picking of statistics or whatever. I mean, you and I have talked about this. Like, if I really wanted to criticize electric cars, I'd be going after the really weak points of electric cars. People pick on the dumbest things, like somehow they have this idea that EVs are catching on fire everywhere and all these other things. It's like, we really know the real problem is, you know, it's going to take a long time to make it possible for people who live in apartments.
Yeah.
There's issues there where it's simply not practical for people unless it gets to a situation where, like you said before, if every street lamp has a charger on it, then maybe, even if it's a level 1 or level 2 charger, then maybe that changes things.
Yeah, or a parking meter, street lamps, parking meters. Over in Europe, there was oh God, probably been 15 years ago now. There was a movement to convert payphone booths to electric car chargers. Right?
It's a good idea.
Nobody's using payphones anymore, so use that installation to go
Yeah,
ahead
but
and charge
there's a
cars. So,
difference there. So payphones use low voltage wiring,
oh yeah, yeah,
right? They're not using. It'd be different if they had 110 power draw. They don't even have that. So,
yeah.
there's a difference. Whereas, your
Well,
street
yeah, but they
lamps.
do they do have lights in them, right? So there is at
Oh, that's
least,
true. So they must have
you know,
something.
so
Yeah.
there's some juice there. They're not completely standalone.
And
One
I
of our
think the majority of people could deal with level 1 charging.
Oh yeah, I did.
If you had level 1 charging available everywhere where people could just plug in and, add 3 to 5 miles of range to their car every hour while
Yeah,
they're somewhere, I think you find it's not really such a big deal. I mean, I think, and then if you have shopping centers have level 2 chargers, and then, you have your level 3s as needed, I think you can get through a lot of things.
oh yeah. Well, I keep stressing this. I own an electric car. I've had it since 2019, and for the first 3 years of ownership, I just used 110 for that car because I park it in the garage at night, plug it in just before I went to bed, wake up in the morning, I get a full charge. It's not rocket science. In fact, one guy, there's an article posted where he's making the point, if you want to convince people to adoption, have them understand that this is just the same thing as you plugging in your car, your phone at night. There's no difference. It's just like that. In fact, Honda just received a patent for wireless charging. So you don't even actually have to, at some point, you won't even have to actually physically plug the car in. You pull into the driveway or the spot where the wireless charger pad is, you pull over it, you probably get a light on the dash that says, good, bing, you're good. You get out of the car, you go have dinner at night, and overnight at some point, the car charges itself, and you never have to actually physically, like I do, go out, plug it in, unplug it, which is no big deal. It takes, 5 seconds? So.
All right, Bill, you had an article for us that you had picked out on the hydrogen economy in America faces a number of challenges.
Fascinating. That really, I put in there because I think it's got some really interesting points regarding where you prioritize, right? I mean, anytime you make a financial decision of this magnitude as a country or as an industry, where do you prioritize? And so he lays out, I think it's six or seven different scenarios and where this technology, green hydrogen, or whatever you want to call it, blue hydrogen, whatever, where we should be focusing our attention and spending our money. And he's got that. I won't go into read the article, right? But that's just a fascinating, and it is not in putting it into. I'm sorry, BMW, it's not in putting them in your electric cars. Maybe, and in fact, it's not even applicable in what they call short range marine or short range aircraft. Where it is applicable is in the longer range marine, like for example, transatlantic, transpacific, or in longer range aircraft, flying, maybe across Europe or, Chicago to Denver or something like that. That's where we need to be focusing our attention and our research.
Yeah, so viewers, Bill and I aren't we don't get real excited about hydrogen. It's just, we do report the news on it, and you can take that how you will. But it's interesting because this article was talking about how they think somehow Exxon and Aramco pushed for this $100 billion of federal tax and production credits for hydrogen in the thing, because they make dirty hydrogen from methane. And this is part of the oil production process. Hydrogen is sort of a byproduct. And it's interesting kind of to see, because you have ways of making, like you're saying, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, you have the dirty hydrogen. And, I don't know. It just always strikes me as a non-starter.
Yeah, they make the hydrogen to refine the gasoline. That's what their hydrogen is used for, is in the gasoline refinery, taking that crude oil and making something that you can burn in your internal combustion engine. And they obviously have, if they can take and sell. I mean, that's where the plastics came from. They had all of that oil that they produced for World War II, and they had to do something with that excess. So they got their chemists involved, and they started making. Remember what was the movie with Dustin Hoffman? Where the guy, he's a graduate, and the guy says, "Future's plastic," right? Well, that's an outgrowth of the fact that we had all that excess petroleum that we were using to, run the war machine. And now what are you going to do with that stuff? Well, let's make plastics out of it.
Right.
Up to that point, we were doing Bakelite. And I'm still not quite sure what Bakelite is, but it was an early precursor to plastics. And of course, now we have this problem of microplastics and everything, from an infant baby's tissue to marine life, under the North Pole. It's just, it's crazy. So that we need to figure out a way to get off of that. And here, this is a great chart. This is the chart. I guess there are 5 categories. So this is where, if you're going to spend your money, this is where you want to spend the money.
Yeah, if you're going to do hydrogen, they're saying use it for refining, because it's already a byproduct of the gasoline production process, and so they might as well use it for powering that, and for making an ammonia. Yeah. But what I find is really interesting when it says where it's terrible. And it's funny because we see all these things that's like, oh, forget EVs because Toyota's going to make this hydrogen engine that runs on water and you're just going to,
Yeah,
but what they don't talk about is, distilled water and how much energy it takes to create that hydrogen in
yeah,
that process and things like that. But it says it's going to be terrible for just regular power generation, light duty vehicles and buildings. They're not even, well, and like you said, short haul shipping,
yep,
industrial processes, heavy
yep,
duty vehicles. That's interesting that it doesn't like it for trucking. And that's one of the things that we've kind of been sort of hopeful when we talk about the
yeah.
Nikola and Walmart and all that. Um, seasonal electricity storage, short haul aviation, like they're not sure about that. But then they feel good about it in steel production, long haul aviation, long haul shipping,
Yep.
and petrochemical manufacturing,
Yep.
which
Plastics.
those it's interesting because the one, when people think about, like, we're about electric vehicles, people always think about cars and stuff like that. And it's interesting because we already see that EVs make a lot more sense than hydrogen in this
Fuel cell. Yeah.
um in this space. And that makes for a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, that's crazy that 4 million people are without power after a hurricane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, it obviously, if they were in a situation where they had an electric car or if they had solar, they would have solutions for not being without power.
Well, as long as the electric car wasn't flooded by the seawater. They had
Right.
this one incident, and I don't know if there are any more, but they had this one incident of a Tesla parked in a garage, and it had been flooded by the salt water, and apparently that had facilitated. I don't know whether they tried to plug the car in, or it was plugged in when it was flooded, and then power was cut, and then power came on. We don't understand all of what happened there, but I saw these headlines like, "Oh my God, all these Teslas are going up in smoke." Well, I don't, they're warning, and they have that one incident. I don't know how many others there are. I had an interesting this. I had an interesting conversation with Chat GPT today. I was asking this question. You supposedly can take a phone that's been fallen in the toilet, or whatever, gotten wet, and you can put it in a container with rice, and that
Mhm.
will help apparently dry it out and restore it back to function. So I said, well, why couldn't we do that with these cars, right? And of course, then I had this long conversation with the Chat GPT on what it would take to do that. You don't want to use rice, obviously for where are you going to get all the rice, right, to put a car in. So
Cardboard,
yeah,
concrete. Concrete
yeah.
would suck the water right out of it.
Well, that's one way. So there are different ways that they suggested vacuum pack where you put it and actually suck the moisture out using vacuum. Air drying where you put it in and you run, dry hot air through the car. So different things you can do. So it was an interesting conversation. But then I got into the whole issue. Well, could you make a business out of that? And how many
You could have
cars
a
might
giant rice pit. You could drive the car into the
just
giant
drive it?
rice pit and cover it up with rice.
Right, exactly. So, of course, how long would that take, right? That's or you do like the Egyptians did with the mummies, right? You run them into natrium, which is a salt,
Yeah.
and you let that suck it out. So, I guess there are different ways to do it, but then I got to, well, what are the insurance and product liability issues? You run this car through this process, you turn it back over to the owner, and 2 weeks later it catches fire. You
Yeah.
know,
I don't know. I don't know what that solution
yeah.
is. Anyways, well, Bill, that was all I had for today. It was a pretty good show. We covered a lot of topics today, folks.
There was the one just briefly. There was the article that God, now what was it? Oh, hang on just a sec. No, maybe not.
How high of an elevation can you get your car to in Florida? It's not like it gets very high.
I don't know. You know, what, near the center of the state around Orlando? Isn't that about the highest point? So
Maybe.
yeah. Dang, there was one other that I suggested we take a look at. Maybe we covered it.
Oh, you
But
want to?
anyway,
Well, yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good. We
let's
went on for a long
yeah.
time today.
Hey, you're the producer. It's your call,
Yeah.
man.
Anyways, folks, want to thank everybody for watching today, and I'll be back with Bill on Thursday. Until then, everybody have a great day.